This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, welcome to Aspire to Soar. My name's Kerry and today I'm joined by Paul, who is going to share his journey with severe Crohn's disease back to health. So thank you for joining me today, Paul. Welcome to the channel.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks a lot for having me.
Just to get started then, if you could maybe fill us in on a bit of background about your Crohn's disease. So when you were first diagnosed and what life was like for you then, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was 18, almost 19 when I was diagnosed. Really, I think looking back, I have even been able to figure out what kind of started the whole cascade of symptoms, which are kind of called, Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease. It was a trip to the Caribbean. I was on reading week and I had a break from university, and I went to St. Martin's. And about 3 days before the trip was over, I ate some shellfish, some shrimps. And that night, I had a lot of stomach problems. I was vomiting, and it was clear I had eaten something bad. And really, up until then, my digestive system had been totally normal. It worked fine. It continued for the rest of the few days that I was on this trip. And then when I got back to Toronto, where I'm from, it just continued. So I went to see a doctor, and the doctor was kind of hesitant to do much about it. So he said, look, just try to let your system kind of work it out, take Imodium, things like that. So I did that he said, if it hasn't subsided in about 2 weeks, come back. So I did that, didn't subside, went back to him. He then sent me to a specialist, a gastroenterologist, who then, did some official tests, colonoscopy, so on, biopsies, and said, and basically told me, you've got, Crohn's disease. So at 18, it was a big shocker. I really didn't know, how to take it, because you kind of go from being a normal person, whatever that means, kind of eating pretty much everything, having a very active lifestyle, not being really inhibited in much of what you need to do on a daily basis, to suffering a lot of chronic pain, a lot of embarrassing stuff that really affects the self-esteem. And you just always imagine, whatever rut you're in, you're going to come out of it. You're going to get out of it. But then when you have a doctor and a specialist tell you, no, you're not going to come out of it. This is a chronic disease. And you just need to basically get used to this is your kind of your new reality. It's a lot for the brain to process. So yeah, it was a very dark period in my life.
Yeah, and did they give you any explanation of how it can just occur at a certain point?
Right. So no, I mean that's one thing. And so we're talking about, oh geez, well, I'm 45 now. That was 19. So I lived with the disease for over 20 years. Luckily, I've had 4 years of complete remission in the last 4 years. So so there's been some there have been some good years in that long run. But the only explanation I ever got, because that is something, that's one of the first things you ask the doctor is, why is this happening to me? What did I do? And the explanation I got from all the doctors I saw over the years, and I did get, a second and a third opinion. I ended up being treated by the head of Mount Sinai gastroenterology department in Toronto, considered to be the absolute, utmost expert in inflammatory bowel disease in all of Canada. And it was the same answer every time I asked, what caused this? Why has it happened? And the answer was, we don't know. We don't understand autoimmune diseases, right? I started hearing that a lot, autoimmune. And I guess the closest I got to some kind of an explanation was, well, your immune system is faulty for reasons we don't understand. and it's decided to start attacking your gut and
Mhm.
your body. So according to their explanation, the culprit was my own immune system.
Okay.
So there's this kind of reflexive thing where um, it's something in me. It's something that's very much part of me. You can't possibly get rid of your immune system. You can certainly beat it down and suppress it, and that's obviously one method they use quite frequently for autoimmune diseases. But it's sort of like, as long as you've got an immune system, you're going to have this thing, because that's basically what an autoimmune disease is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was pretty much the full extent of the explanation I got.
Wow.
Even having asked many times about diet, about food, about that whole shellfish incident that
Mhm.
seemed to have kind of
Yeah.
started the whole cascade, there was never any recognition of diet and a disease which basically is chronic inflammation in the gut. So no connection between what you're putting in your gut every day
Mhm.
and chronic inflammation of the gut, according to the official narrative.
Wow. And that continued for the whole time, even with, over the course of, it's not 20 years, is it less than 20 years?
It was over 20
Yeah,
years.
20 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
I had active disease for about 21
Wow.
years. Yeah.
And that never changed. There was never any new science that came up, any new theories that came. It was just, this
Right.
is it, this is you.
So what changed was the therapies they used. Those tend to change every couple of years.
Mhm.
There was no change in, we're getting closer to solving this thing,
Mhm.
or we're expecting a breakthrough,
Yeah.
or there's some new therapy that's really showing tremendous benefit.
Mhm.
It was more just, we'll try this, we'll see how it goes, we'll use it for as long as we can, and when it stops working, we'll try something else.
Okay.
So when I was diagnosed in the 90s, basically in the mid 90s, the main pharmaceutical drugs they used to treat inflammatory bowel disease were steroids and antibiotics. That was basically it. So that's what I was given for many years, and to be on steroids every single day for years on end is a really, it has a lot of severe side effects as
Yeah.
well, including psychological disturbances. I mean, it literally is known to really affect your mood and induce depression and things like that. So that was the course I followed, and it was interesting because I never actually felt I was in remission during that course of treatment. I felt that the symptoms would kind of go down. They would wane. Sometimes they'd go down, and then sometimes I'd have periods where they were very flared up and active. So the only thing they would do is up the dosage of medication, and then bring it down when I felt I was doing a bit better.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was basically the way it was treated for a long time. And then in the 2000s, they started introducing biologics. Those are non-steroidal. They're not steroids. They're not antibiotics. They're drugs that essentially they start suppressing TNF, anti-TNF, tumor necrosis factor. These are kind of molecules and things that they found people with inflammatory bowel disease have an overabundance of. So your body's producing
Okay.
too much of this stuff. So they use these biological drugs to then kind of tamper down on that stuff. And again, it always comes back to suppressing the immune system in one form or another. So I was put on those drugs for a number of years as well, kind of with mixed results.
Okay. And when you're saying that you take all these medications and they're all for suppressing your immune system, did that affect other areas of your life then as well? Because obviously, if you're giving yourself a weak immune system to tamp down this overreaction,
yeah,
how did that look? I mean, I guess maybe a lot of illness, a lot of sickness, a lot of
yeah. There. I mean, again, in Canada, winters, there's always colds and things going around, flus, and like clockwork, I'd always have pretty rough winters. Just being being
Yeah.
sick every
Yeah.
winter, and getting infections, sometimes ear infections, sometimes throat infections. And, I was given antibiotics as part of my treatment. So
Mhm.
I was literally taking
Okay.
antibiotics steady, which, I think just about everybody understands at this point that
Yeah.
that's a really bad thing to do for your for
Yeah.
your biology. And then, if I was told I have bronchitis, or even one time I had a pneumonia, so they give you more antibiotics. So
Yeah.
yeah, they were just piling on the antibiotics, and of course my my health situation was not getting better. It was
Yeah.
it was basically declining.
Wow. And it all feeds into this view of yourself as well, doesn't it? As I imagine you come to view yourself as a weak, you're a weak, my body is weak, it's a weak body. I
Absolutely.
can't, there's no confidence.
Absolutely. I mean that it comes back to the very first meeting I had with the specialist, which again the whole messaging there from the minute I walked through the door was, your system, your biology, your immune system does not work properly. It's basically, it's defective, and you do very much internalize that message. I
Yeah.
remember, certainly for the first 12 months, I felt I was defective. I felt something was really wrong with me. All my social circle, just continue doing all the stuff they love doing, and I never saw anybody really sort of suffering chronically and so on. I'm sure people obviously had their own health issues to
Yeah.
deal with as well, but there was a stark difference, and I very much internalized all of that.
Yeah.
And again, in hindsight, and after having healed myself, um, that's a critical component to, chronic illness.
Mhm.
It's planting that seed from day one, from the first moment you walk through that doctor's office,
Mhm.
planting that seed of, there's something wrong with you. You're defective, essentially. And if you keep reinforcing that idea, which was every single meeting, with the doctor,
Yeah.
you're really going to internalize that, and then ultimately you're going to plug that into your subconscious mind, and it's just going to be, that program is just going to be running
Yeah.
probably for the rest of your life, unless something snaps you out of it.
Yeah, exactly. So when did your moment come? When was the point when you just thought, I am not doing this anymore? There's got to be something
Right,
else.
right. So, basically, there's it's a kind of a long story. I'll try to make it brief. But there were these, couple of decades of just dealing with these same chronic symptoms.
Yeah.
Sorry to be graphic, just a lot of diarrhea, a lot of
Hmm.
bloody diarrhea,
Hmm.
a lot of pain in the abdomen. You eat something and run to the washroom mid-meal. So, at its worst, could be running to the toilet 15, 8, 18 times a day. Really, my weight would go up and go down, and I'd have periods where I just lose a lot of weight, and then I try so hard to pack it back on by just taking in a lot of calories, which ultimately, it's this weird calculus where you're like, if I can just eat tons of calories, I'll at least gain a little bit of weight. I'll still feel very sick, but I'll gain a bit of weight.
Yeah.
So that went on for a couple of decades, basically. And as I mentioned, they tried different drugs and steroids, and eventually I was taken off of that. I was put on, something called, Purinthol, which is, actually, a drug developed for, blood cancer, for leukemia.
Wow.
Yeah, they found when giving this stuff, to people with leukemia, some small group of people in those trials who also had, inflammatory bowel disease supposedly responded well, like their symptoms kind of went down. So
Okay.
that's when they start kind of repurposing those
Yeah.
therapies and those drugs, for other diseases that it wasn't originally created for. So I was put on these heavy, again, immunosuppressants, and then they added the biologic drugs, sorry. So all of that kind of culminated, and what was weird was the symptoms were actually getting worse. so the peak really would have been around 2017, 2018. And at that point, my symptoms started to change, and it was no longer about urgency and running to the toilet all the time, but I started vomiting everything I was eating, and so I would get these intense pains in my abdomen, and after an hour or two, everything would just come up. So my doctor did a CT and later an MRI to get a better picture, and he said, well, you've got in your small bowel, you've got 3 long stretches of very narrow bowel. It's called stricturing or stenosis. And what happens is, the small bowel is already small. It's already quite narrow. And with chronic inflammation, that space, the space is actually called the lumen. It gets reduced and reduced and reduced because of all the sort of puffy inflammation, and then food can get stuck, especially fibrous food or hard foods like nuts and things like that. So they saw what was going on. They said, you got 3 long strips, separate strips in the small intestine. Some were like 20 centimeters long, that are extremely strictured, and that's why food is not passing. So I had to go on mostly a liquid diet. It involved kind of just blending everything I was eating. Occasionally I would attempt some solid foods, and it was like a 50-50 shot if I get blocked up. When I would get blocked up, it would be hours of just being incapacitated. It was just agonizing pain, vomiting, followed by more cycles of agonizing pain and more vomiting. Really, really not a fun period whatsoever. So I had never imagined that the Crohn's would get to that stage. I didn't even know about it. Actually, no doctor in those 20 years had ever mentioned sort of what they call stricture disease, which is a kind of a subset of Crohn's. So it was another surprise, 2 decades after being diagnosed, that you've now got this situation which is really dire, where you can't eat food. So you can just imagine what happens when you can't eat. And it was really grim. So what they said is, okay, more than likely, this is all scar tissue that is built up over decades of inflammation. The tissue goes from inflammation to scarring. They said, in the case of scarring, your only option is surgery. You have to remove those strips of intestine surgically. They said, what we're going to do is double your dosage of medication to see if there's any chance some of that is still inflammation and not scarring. And maybe, we'll see if we can give drug therapy one more shot. So they ramped me up to double dose of something called Remicade and Fleximab. It's a biologic drug. It costs the state somewhere in the neighborhood of like $2,000 or $3,000 per infusion, and I was getting an infusion once every 6 weeks. So if you live somewhere with a medical system that's pretty much covered by taxpayer money, most of it was I paid a small chunk of it, and I had some work insurance that was covering part of it, and but it's a huge cost to the state. So doubling the dose, it's double the cost, right? So they decided they want to try this. In the clinic where I was getting it done, the nurses said, we've never seen anybody getting such a high dose of this drug. They were like shocked. They were literally saying, are you sure this is right? It's not a typo or something? You're supposed to be getting double the dose? I said, that's what my doctor said. And I spoke to her about that conversation with the nurses, and that they had never seen that before. And she said, oh, no. It's very common. Don't worry about it. It's nothing to worry about. I just kept hearing, don't ask questions and don't worry. That was pretty much it. So so I had reached this point. We did this drug therapy for what was it, 3-4 months longer. The situation didn't improve. At that time, I was working at a solar energy company in the marketing department in quite a high pressure job, and it was just very, very difficult to be focused and get work done during that whole situation. And ultimately, I got laid off, supposedly for poor quality of work, but truly it was just missing too much work. I had really missed a lot of time out because I was sick. And the other thing is, with these kind of internal diseases, you can quite often look pretty normal from the outside. So I think sometimes, I felt certainly there were cases where people didn't believe I was as
Yeah.
sick as I was claiming to be, and calling my boss and saying, yet again, I'm just too sick to come into work, and I'll try to do what I can from home. I sometimes got the feeling that it was like, you're just taking too much time off. This, the work is piling up, and there was never much compassion, which was also, just added to the anxiety of the whole
Yeah.
situation. So we had reached that stage. I had been let off. I'd been laid off from work, and my doctor said, you can't continue like this. You've got to do a surgery. I had been hospitalized a couple of years before that, and I really didn't want to, go back to emergency hospitalization. So the doctor said, you're better off to do an elective surgery than to get rushed to hospital and have to do an emergency surgery because something is stuck in the small bowel, and then you've got the danger of perforation, of basically of rupture of the small bowel. Sepsis is when basically the contents of your small bowel end up in your body and on your organs and so on, and that's a kind of a life-threatening situation. So she said, we're gonna book your surgery for 1 month from now. Do everything you can to stay safe in that 1 month, and you'll do the surgery. It's what's called a triple resection surgery, where they basically cut those 3 different pieces out and then kind of stitch everything back together.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's, I would say that was the moment where I had really kind of hit rock bottom. I was terrified. I started reading about these surgeries for Crohn's and triple resections and double resections. And unfortunately, most of the people that undergo those surgeries end up having to do more surgeries later. One, because the disease is rarely localized just to those pieces that get removed. So what they find is the disease comes back in the less diseased parts of the gut.
Yeah.
And the other problem is when you start snipping away at the intestine, the small intestine, you need to basically fuse it back together, stitch it back together. And where it reconnects, you can get scar tissue building up, and it can create blockage. And then they need to cut that piece out as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you often end up going down this road, which just sounds like a horror story to me, of what they call short bowel syndrome, where they just have to keep cutting away and cutting away and cutting away until you've got no bowel left, basically.
Mm-hmm. Is that when
and
you
that's
end up
not
with a bag?
and then you ultimately end up with a colostomy bag. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that was just frightful for me, just terrifying. And I was desperate to figure a way out of it. I mentally wasn't ready to go into that operation. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And I dealt with a lot of pretty invasive medical procedures and a lot of horrible stuff and a lot of pain over those 2 decades. But that thought of that operation, the fact that it couldn't even guarantee more than maybe a year or 2 of quiet, and then you sort of end up back on the operating table, it was really frightful. It was dreadful, and I was full of dread, literally.
Yeah.
So and then my doctor, so I started basically doing some independent research, because I had been laid off. I was like 24 hours a day, almost not sleeping, scouring the internet for any information I could find that might get me out of this situation. Was there any solution for stricture disease that didn't involve surgery? And that's when I started to, find out about different things that I had never really considered before or never thought about.
Wow.
Do you want me to continue with that question,
so
or do you have
thinking it's like having your, essentially like having your back against the wall, you've got the firing squad that are advancing on you, and it's often you get to this point when it's going to tip you over the edge, and you make a decision, don't you? Almost like that, that sliding doors moment, isn't it? Where, you can go one way or you can go the other way, and you're forced into this
desperation.
Essentially. Okay, go on. What did you find, and what did you try?
Right. So, I started seeing more and more information, first and foremost, about diet, and how diet does play a key role in inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's and colitis and other chronic diseases of the chronic inflammatory diseases of the gut. And every time I'd asked my doctors, they dismissed it. The answer was always, show me the clinical proof that food has any bearing on, on your disease.
Okay.
And of course, there isn't, or, I mean, I'm going back to discussions I had in the 90s and early 2000s. There weren't, mountains of data. There weren't trials done. And so, they would say whatever you've heard about diet is anecdotal, right? And that was always the way of kind of putting down anyone who said diet's working for me. Hey, it's making me feel better. Well, it's not science, it's anecdote, right? So it's a way of devaluing it as being worthy of consideration. And yeah, it's silly, it's nonsense. People, there's this other aspect too of inflammatory bowel disease that they tell you from the get-go, which is, yes, you're going to be sick and you're going to be sick the rest of your life, and so on. But sometimes people go into remission for reasons we don't understand. Just as we don't understand why the immune system starts attacking itself, sometimes it just stops attacking itself, and then you go into remission. So anytime somebody's able to get themselves out of chronic symptoms through a non-pharmaceutical intervention, the answer is, well, yeah, because these diseases, for reasons we don't understand, sometimes just switch off. It's like a light switch. These sort of, I don't know who, somebody's switching it on and switching it off sort of randomly. So there's no need to even recognize that something like diet may affect a disease, because if clinically it shows any improvement, they'll just say, well, yeah, because sometimes these diseases just switch off for reasons we don't understand.
Yeah. So
there's already that thing, that safety net in place in case anybody figures out, there are other options. So I started reading a lot about diet. There are tons of diets, really, so many different diets. Some of them, just to name off, are like SCD specific carbohydrates diet. There are diets that promote, paleo and carnivore diets, where it's like, just strip everything away and only eat meat, as our cave people ancestors did, which I don't believe for a second. I don't think anybody 500,000 years ago was eating 3 big servings of meat a day. No chance. So there's all this stuff, which is, my feeling is it's stuff that's kind of promoted by the meat industry and used to really sell more product. But so you've got all these different diets and things going on. But I started to read a bit about the importance of fiber in maintaining a healthy gut. And for 20 years, I had been on a low fiber or a no fiber diet, because actually the one thing that doctors would mention when it came to diet was to avoid high fiber food, because they said that it's irritating to a inflamed and ulcerated gut, and it can cause blockages if the disease becomes a stricture disease. So the message was always, be very cautious about things like fruits and vegetables and leafy greens, healthy food. Be very cautious of that. And I was often told, you're underweight. Go eat high calorie food. Go eat cheeseburgers and drink milkshakes, and then eat like eat a whole pie for dessert, because if you take in 5,000 calories a day, you'll start gaining weight again, and you're grossly underweight. So that was some of the messaging I got regarding diet, but never anything along the lines of there are certain foods that'll help quell the inflammation and kind of get your gut working properly again. So I started weeding through some of this stuff, and ultimately through a very bizarre, almost call it really a chance meeting, I ended up finding this video on YouTube that had by a professor of oncology, and most of his videos were about cancer, but he had this one video about Crohn's and colitis and inflammatory bowel disease. And it was about a 20-minute presentation. There was a lot of esoteric jargon, things I didn't fully understand, because it was a presentation for doctors. but from, I was able to understand about 60-70% of it. And he was just talking about stuff I had never heard of before. And it was just such a different way of recognizing the disease and treating the disease, that I was really intrigued. And he kept going on about the microbiome, the human microbiome. And I had never heard of that either. So and this video had, I think, about 80 views or something. Like it's one of these videos that's just,
Yeah,
on the periphery of YouTube and of the internet that nobody's really stumbled on. He himself had like a handful of subscribers. It wasn't popular, information by the slightest. But I was so curious about all this that I decided to contact him actually.
Wow.
And I looked him up. I found his info online. I sent him an email, and we were able to have a phone consultation because he was in a different country. He was actually in Germany on a research project. And that conversation that I had with this professor of oncology was the pivotal moment for me. That was really the game changer. And I can literally mark down that moment as being a real catalyst in my healing journey. That was the catalyst in my healing journey. And he said to me, look, they've got it completely wrong. They don't know how to treat these diseases properly. They don't understand the root causes, and it's ineffective. Their methods are ineffective. And he said, look, you've had it for 20 years. You've been on all the drugs they have, and your situation is just getting worse. You're now on your way to the operation room. So first thing he did in that conversation was he planted this seed in my mind, that, wow, maybe everything I've been doing until now was wrong. And that, in his own words, these diseases can be treated and reversed with completely different methods, and essentially natural methods, and diet being a big part of it. So I still couldn't grasp it all, and it's a lot to digest. Pardon the but I wasn't 100% sold, but I was so desperate for just another voice, and this was so far to left field that I thought to myself, I've got, at this point I had like 3 weeks until the surgery, and I said, I've got to try this. I've got to listen to what he's doing, and I've got to try this thing. He didn't give me all that much advice in terms of, he didn't give me lists of menus of things to eat and what. He just said, look, go learn about the microbiome and what it is. He also called it the gut organ. And he said, that's the key here. That's the key. If you can restore your microbiome, your gut flora, to a healthy state, you'll see the disease switch off. The symptoms will basically go away. And I said, even, look, I'm on the way to surgery. I can't hold down food. Do you think that can be reversed too? And he said, I do believe it can be reversed. I said, what about the scar tissue and all that? He said, look, the body is a miraculous machine, when it's working properly. And he said, I can't guarantee you anything, right? We're just having basically an informal phone call. But he said, I believe there's a good chance you can, if not avoid the surgery completely, prolong the surgery. Because he said the last thing you want to do is have a premature surgery, because you just get caught in that cycle of surgeries and more surgeries. So he said, you want to defer it for as long as possible, if not avoid it altogether. So that was it. And we had one more very brief call after that, about a month later. But that was as much guidance as I got from him. So it still required a lot of research and a lot of digging around. So I really started reading about how to take care of your gut microbiome, how to rebuild it, how to have a healthy, strong gut microbiome. I started getting into biology and digestion and learning all the Latin names for all the different parts of the digestive tract and everything that's going on in there. Because that's another thing, we're never really educated on, you've got like basic biology in high school, but you never really understand what's going on inside you. These biological processes are absolutely miraculous.
No, exactly.
Yeah. So Carrie, I was about 2 weeks away from the surgery. I had started following a diet that first and foremost eliminated I don't know how much we want to drill down here with all the
Uh-huh.
details.
Yeah.
I'll
Give us,
try to do kind of overview.
yeah.
Just eliminated processed foods, junk food, foods that contain refined sugars, refined flour, everything that's processed, really. So what it required a lot of, like, you have to take charge of your meals. You have to cook your own meals. You can't count on buying stuff in restaurants because you don't know what's going in the food. You can't, you shouldn't be buying commercial products like frozen TV dinners and stuff like that from the supermarket, because it's just, once you start, that was another thing. I'd never read what's in these products that I was buying. You never flip it over and read the tiny print. And then you start reading it and you go, well, what are emulsifiers? What are stabilizers? What are anti-caking agents? What are preservatives? What are, there's like a massive list of all these things. Why is there titanium dioxide in the food? I mean, what is titanium? Isn't that what my laptop is made of? Titanium? It's like bizarre. So you start becoming informed, really, and then you start making some connections and recognizing all these chemical food additives could be doing you some damage, could be doing you some harm. So you eliminate all the processed stuff, and you try like hell. He himself, the professor of oncology, told me, do not take antibiotics unless it's a life and death situation. They shred your microbiome. It's like dropping a nuclear bomb on your microbiome, because you're trying to get to some some pathogen like salmonella or whatever. But in doing so, you're wiping out all the good bacteria that you need there. So you just really messing up your gut flora, and that just creates a whole cascade of other problems. So yeah, I was about 2 weeks away. My doctor had instructed me about a week prior to stop all my medication, because you can't go into a major surgery while your immune system is suppressed, because you just won't be able to recover from such a surgery while your immune system is basically beat down. So she took me off of everything. It was her decision, just until I did the surgery. And then she said, a week or two after surgery, we'll kind of start you back up on all the stuff you were taking. So it was her decision to take me off everything. I had started following a diet that I believed was a healthier diet than what I'd been doing prior, and a few other things, some meditation, yoga, stuff like that. And I actually started to feel better. I started to notice a reduction in my symptoms, despite not being on any medication at all. And I started to feel better. So I called her. What was it? That was actually about 1 week before the surgery. And I said, look, I'm doing something. I kind of got a second opinion, and I'm doing something mostly involving food, diet, and I'm feeling better. I can actually notice the results. So I would like to keep going with this. I think it's going to produce more results. At that point, she absolutely freaked out on me. She said, what you're doing is irresponsible. She said, think about your children. You've got to be healthy. You've got to be strong for your children. You're playing with fire. You could have a perforation. You could end up really sick. Basically, she kept mentioning, life-threatening situation. And she was just putting as much pressure on me as you can imagine, especially by invoking my children, right? I mean, it's, what have you been to a doctor and they start like bringing your family members into the conversation? So really trying to pull at my heartstrings, I guess, really trying to, play with my emotions by mentioning my young children. But something inside me just said, no, I can feel something here is working. I know. Nobody knows your body better than you do. And she basically ended up hanging up on me. And for somebody who claims to care so much about her patients and me, I never heard from her again after that. She never called back to follow up to see how I was doing. Anything, nothing. By canceling, all I wanted to do was actually defer the surgery. I said, give me a month. Let's reschedule it for a month from now. She was furious. So I ended up canceling the surgery. Never heard back from her. Never rescheduled the surgery. Yeah, and that set me really on the healing journey, and it was all up from there, basically.
Wow, it's just, I just think for somebody who's on the other end of the phone to be professing that they care about you so much and
Yeah.
they want you to be okay to then just cut you off like that and put the
Yeah.
phone down and walk
Right.
away. There's no where's the love, where's the caring, where's the
responsibility, right? What
Yeah.
about the Hippocratic Oath and that kind of stuff, right? Where is that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it really, so it opened my eyes to so much, because it wasn't just about discovering how to heal myself internally and to understand my body better, to understand why there had been this chronic inflammation, this chronic disease for a couple of decades. But I also started to understand that the system itself externally plays a big part in keeping people ill. It really does. And I firmly believe that now, having really come out of this thing. I mean, at that point, when I was just a few weeks into my healing, I was still confused and on the fence, and I certainly hadn't made a 100% recovery. That took years.
Yeah.
But I started to question a lot of stuff, right? Really one of the first things that set off that question mark was when I would go for the infusions, and the nurses were like, "Are you sure this is right? Nobody gets this high a dose." And it turns out that Remicade, infliximab, what I was getting, is classified as a black box drug by the FDA.
Wow.
And a black box drug, you only get that classification if
Mhm.
enough people have died from taking it or had
Yeah.
very adverse effects. And one of the unfortunate side effects of it is lymphatic cancer. So I know 2 people with inflammatory bowel disease that were getting getting the treatment, the infliximab, Remicade, that ended up getting lymphatic cancer while they were taking this medication. 2 people, and I don't know that many people, with Crohn's and that are taking that medication. So there's a reason why it's got that black box, why it's been classified as black box. And I think that some of the numbers I read, I can't say if they're absolutely accurate, is that something like 40,000 people have died over the 20 years that they've been using this drug. I think in the U.S. alone, maybe, because they use it for arthritis. They use it for a lot of chronic inflammatory diseases. So it's a dangerous drug, and just to sort of haphazardly, double the dosage, is obviously a pretty dangerous thing to do. And I was just told over and over again, no, don't worry, don't question it, don't worry about it, just do it. That was really the message. So yeah, so that was when the nurses were like, "We've never seen anybody getting this much of it." That's when a few alarm bells started to go off, and I started to question the motives of my doctor, my specialist, who I had been with at that point for almost maybe eight years, something like that. And I started to wonder, is she really trying to heal me, or is she trying to sell more product? That's ultimately what I concluded. And by the way, the surgeries too, I mean, those cost a lot of money, again, to the state. The hospital bills the state.
Okay. Okay.
But I think I read a surgery like the one they wanted to do. I think it maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000-$40,000 for a surgery like that.
Wow.
So yeah, so
Money.
it's lucrative business.
Yeah.
And I think I've heard there's when a doctor refers somebody for surgery, I believe they get some rewards of some kind for that referral, monetary rewards. So it's business.
Yeah.
And it's a conveyor belt, really, because most people that are being treated in the gastro department, with enough time, will be sent for a surgery. It's statistically, I think it's like 90% of people with Crohn's and colitis eventually do a surgery, because it gets to that point where you can't hold down food. So then they say surgery is the only option.
Interesting, isn't it? See, I live in the UK, where we don't at the moment our hospital system is not set up in that way. So I always find it fascinating when I speak to people from Canada and America, and their hospital systems are so different, and the doctors are so invested in the money, because ours are just funded by the state, and in general they don't get anything. They get paid by the state, and that's it, and that's how it is. It's fascinating, these systems.
Are there potentially any perks for the doctors in the UK that are direct from the pharmaceutical companies? Things like the conventions, and then they end up at a 5-star hotel, and it's a week of, 5-star restaurants and 5-star hotels, and I'm sure lots of
Post-it notes
and golden pens and watches, and
yeah, definitely. So they're still
there may still be, there may be incentives, maybe not actual cash in hand incentives, but probably other
they still
incentives.
do get, I worked in a medical library when I was younger, and the doctors used to they all had their pens and they all had their post-it notes carried around with them. So you're right, they obviously do, and the medical reps used to come in and give seminars in the in the building. So so
the reps, right?
They used to come in and give
sales reps or medical reps.
Exactly. So it's an interest in the medical system in general, but you don't, like you say, when you started 20 years ago, you don't realize this. You go into this with you're a doctor and you're gonna fix me, because that's what I've learned. I've learned growing up that I don't take any responsibility for my body, or I just you're a doctor, you fix me. I get sick, I go to the doctor fixes me, and then off we go. And then you get into this journey and you're not getting healed, and then this little voice is starting to speak up inside you, and then every time a little voice comes up that says maybe this isn't right, maybe you get squashed back down again and told to be quiet and it's irrelevant. And it keeps coming back, and you push it back down again, and it's hard. It's a constant fight, and to be in that situation where you have that discussion with your doctor, and your doctor does what she did to you. It's that moment where you're either going to go back groveling to her and ask her to please help you, or you're going to listen to that voice, that little voice. And it's in the world we live in and the societies that we live in, it's not a choice that people agree with. I mean, what did your family have anything to say?
Well, I mean, it's everything you said is bang on, and it's like you say, you go, first you go to your family doctor, and when they can't do much other than knock your knee with a little rubber hammer, then they send you to a specialist, right? Who clearly, understands these diseases at a very deep level and knows how to deal with them, knows how to treat them. So there's no need for you to be confused or in the dark, because you're now with a specialist who considered to be the utmost specialist in all of Canada, and has written so many papers and whatnot. So you're right. The conventional way of dealing with disease, chronic disease, is you just put your life into the hands of these people. Now, when I was a teenager and I was diagnosed, that's obviously what my family expected of me, and there was never even a second thought about any other way to deal with something like that. And when from the first meeting you have, when they start really emphasizing that whole message of you're sick, you've got a disease which we don't understand, but you're going to have it now for the rest of your life because your immune system doesn't work properly. You have to accept that, and the whole family has to accept that. And I know there were long periods where I was a bit of a miserable sod, not wanting to come out of my room, not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to participate in family events, not wanting to go on a vacation, because even a long flight is pretty gruesome. And so it's tough. It's tough on everybody you live with. But again, unfortunately, there's illness in my family. My father has chronic illnesses, and he's just been doing it the same way as well. So it's almost something that's passed down, I think, as well. There's really only one way to treat disease, and it's to go to the doctor and listen to what they say and do what they say. And there's that thing where you sometimes have like a doctor with a good bedside manner. I mean, I think all that really means is they're willing to tolerate a certain amount of questions and answer you with a smile. But even there's a limit of how much they'll tolerate, right? So when I would start mentioning, I saw an article on the internet, there'd be a lot of like eyeball rolling and that kind of stuff. And but I was told once by my doctor, doctors don't like when patients read the internet, because there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. We've heard that word a lot recently as well, right? There's a lot of misinformation, and it's being written by people who are not doctors, and they're not experts, and they haven't done all the years of studying and so on. and once again, it's anecdotal stuff. There's
Yeah.
no science to back it up. There's no data to back it up. But anecdotes are, I think, a very important signal. If you've got enough anecdotes building up, then those doctors should be the ones to start kind of, catching that signal and start maybe investigating if there's something worthwhile in all those anecdotes, right? So I think science it may begin with anecdotes. I don't know. I don't know if that's the starting point, but our experiences should not be dismissed as just useless and of no value whatsoever. Our experiences can tell us a lot because that's what we do. We go through life experiencing life, right? And so we draw some conclusions from what's good for us in life and what's bad for us in life. And the it's really it's a shame when you hear things like that. Doctors don't like when people read on the internet. I think it's a threat as well. I think it's maybe a bit of a threat to them that people might start learning about how to really improve their health situation, and therefore not rely on them and their methods and their pharmaceutical drugs as much as they have been until now. So I said to my brother maybe about a year ago or so, it's interesting because if you've got a lawyer and that lawyer is constantly losing you cases in court, you're going to fire that lawyer and you're going to get a different lawyer. If you've got an accountant that's constantly screwing up your books, and you keep having to pay, more income tax because he didn't file your taxes properly and all sorts of stuff, you're going to fire that accountant and you're going to get a better accountant. So why is it with a doctor that's not able to improve your health situation, that's not able to get you out of a disease, and that just basically throws the blame back at you because it's all your fault? It's your body that's damaged and diseased, and your immune system is a vicious thing that keeps attacking you like some kind of an animal that's inside you. Why does nobody say, maybe I should fire this doctor and try to get a better doctor? It's like they get a complete pass, not having to produce much in the way of significant results. People are somehow satisfied enough with a little bit of respite, a little bit of improvement for a short period of time, but it's it goes in waves. You get a little better and then you get a little worse. And if you look at the big picture, again, in my case, I think in most cases, the overall trend is a downward trend until you end up on a surgery table or worse. So strange how they get a complete pass in that area of really not providing much in the way of professional results.
Exactly. But like you said, it's it goes back to the way we're taught. It goes back to us being at school and socially, and we're not taught about our microbiome. We're not taught about taking responsibility for ourselves. We're not taught any of that. You're not taught any of those useful things. You're taught about, I don't know, history and things, things that aren't as relevant to your functioning in everyday life. We're not taught it, so it becomes a fear, doesn't it? It's a fear because we don't know, and we hand that off to somebody else who does know.
And I guess that's part of, again, if you go, people will realize if your lawyer is constantly losing your cases in court, they realize it and they get upset and they fire the lawyer. But this whole field of biology and medicine, I guess it's so abstract to most people. As you say, the education system doesn't do much to inform you about it. That there's not even much, critical thinking involved. It's just like, again, it's all reflexive. It's all, turned inwards, that you're the problem. Your biology is the problem. These people can try and maybe they'll help and maybe they won't, but they're not responsible. You're responsible because it's your body. So that's, it's a bizarre thing. And we know that medicine hasn't always worked that way. The Hippocratic Oath, which obviously, created by the Greeks, was like, you have to do everything in your power to cure somebody, to treat somebody. And back then they used to use herbs and all the stuff that was at their disposal, which I've come to discover that stuff is actually more powerful than pharmaceuticals. And I really have come to discover that. It's mind-boggling how, castor oil or, oregano oil, how powerful that stuff is. And I'm sure a lot of people will still be very skeptical that could be more anti-inflammatory than steroids without all the side effects. Yeah.
Yeah, but people just won't believe you because that's not.
Yeah.
And it's fear as well. It's fear. It's fear of the unknown, fear of something
Yes.
different. It's all
Yes.
just
And it's
built.
and it's monopolization. Clearly, there's been a strategic effort to suppress any, not suppress, discredit. I mean, most people, it's like, would you go see a specialist or would you go see a herbalist? Most people would not put their health in the hands of a herbalist.
Exactly. So how long did it take then? So I know you said it's been a few years of a journey to get to where you are now. So, but what kept you going in the meantime? What were the the wins that you were having along the way?
Right. So, again, really starting with that terrible, that low point, where I just couldn't do the surgery. So I followed the advice of this professor of oncology, and my doctor had taken me off of all the medication. I never went back on them. So I've been 4 years medicine free and surgery free, and it was a slow incremental improvement, really. Sorry, got a bit of frog in my throat. But what was amazing, I guess, in a very early stage, I would compare it to walking a tightrope, because I was really feeling my way around what I could eat, what I couldn't. It's true that you can't eat a high fiber diet when you've got chronic inflammation and ulceration in the gut. I mean, that's what it is. Ulcerative colitis and Crohn's also involves a lot of ulceration. So the thing about fiber is it's quite scratchy, sort of going through your gut. That's one of its functions, is to actually clean off things that have compacted inside your gut. So it's like a brush when you sort of clean out your toilet bowl or whatever. Fiber works in the same mechanism, and that's perfectly fine if the lining of your gut wall is intact and healthy. But if it's chronically inflamed and bleeding and ulcerated, that's going to hurt. So it's going to create a lot of abdominal pain. So by attempting to eat the healthy food and the food that may improve your situation, when that presents a negative response and pain, most people go, okay, so put this on the do not touch list. You don't want to eat that stuff because it's creating pain. So the tightrope analogy is really where I felt I was at, because I knew I had to consume more of this stuff, but the question was how. So it really involved understanding the difference between monosaccharides and simple carbohydrates versus complex carbohydrates, and understanding which foods are simply easier to digest than others, which foods maybe you need to take the skin off of, de-seed them, cook them very well, maybe you need to blend them, but you're still getting that fiber one way or the other. And you start in smaller amounts, and even those smaller amounts have a positive effect and your gut starts healing, you're able to increase the amount, and then you're able to change cooking methods. You're eventually able to start eating raw, which is a wonderfully important thing to do. And it was a slow slog, because it was over 20 years of chronic damage. And there's no doubt that there was some scarring in there and a lot of inflammation and so on. But what's amazing is the cells in your intestine, actually, I believe those are the cells that regenerate the quickest in all of your body. I think it's your intestine and maybe your eyeball. So once you're able to switch off that trigger for the chronic inflammation, finally the gut starts to heal, and that just allows you to keep going. And it's positive reinforcement, basically, because after 1 week or 2 weeks or 1 month, you look back and you go, I really do feel better than I did a month ago. And it's something that can be very clearly measured, because instead of running to the toilet 15 times a day, I'm only maybe going 5 times a day. And you just watch as everything reduces. And Carrie, after 20 years of, and you come to accept this, the illness and the fact that's your new old normal. And you just go, okay, that's life. You got to run to the toilet 10 times a day. That's just how it is. So when you actually, your gut starts working properly again, and you go back, you can barely remember those days, before the disease, and you start feeling that normality again. It's the most encouraging thing you could ever imagine. And I know a lot of people, when they're chronically ill, because I've tried coaching people and reaching out to people, and even on social media, I just post things in groups if anybody wants help to reach out. And most people are not able to make that commitment to healthy eating and just, not eating any processed food, junk food, whatever it is, because it's too hard for them to even connect with what it will feel like to be healthy again. They're so far removed from it. But if they're able to make that initial commitment and get on the healing path, I'm positive every single person will stick with it, because there's nothing more rewarding than being healthy. There's nothing more rewarding than that.
Must be like a natural high as well,
Yeah.
this
Well,
feeling.
it's a natural high, and it's stuff like the mucosal membrane, which is a very thin layer of mucus on the inside of your intestine, which is the first thing to go when you're having chronic inflammation and chronic digestive problems. When that comes back, really what it does is you've got these tiny, they're almost like little fingers actually, and they're called villi.
Yeah.
They're called villi. They're like these tiny fingers, and they're responsible for the uptake of vitamins and minerals and everything in your food that your body needs. So when all that's been stripped away, you're often, you're malnourished. You're just not getting enough vitamins. No matter how much you eat, you're not getting the B12 and the iron and the magnesium and calcium and everything your body needs, because your whole system is damaged. So if you really want to talk about feeling good, once that mucosal membrane comes back with, once the inflammation stops, which is the starting point, and that mucosal membrane comes back, miraculously comes back, and everything, the tight junctions, the cell walls in your gut, which are often a bit permeated and allow pathogens and even food to fall through and get into your bloodstream and trigger that immune response. Once all that tightens up and stops, you not just, it's not just that you're not running to the toilet every time you eat something, but you're getting vitamins and minerals, and your mood is better. Everything is better. And I mean, we could do a 5-hour conversation about the gut-brain axis, but it's a very, very strong axis. And I've become an absolute fanatic about the human microbiome and how it's ultimately the backbone for our immune system. So once your microbiome is working well, you don't get sick, you don't get infections. I had a bout of corona that lasted 3 days. It was like a cold, basically. So I'm really glad that I feel my immune system is robust enough to handle viruses, viral infections, bacterial infections, everything. So it's working as it should. And the most interesting thing I just read about recently is we have microbiomes throughout our body. We've got a skin microbiome. We've got a microbiome on our eyeballs. It turns out, there's microbiome everywhere. We're talking about microorganisms, trillions and trillions and trillions of microbiomes that are part of us, that live on us. We're the host. And we have a microbiome in our brain that they've recently discovered. And it turns out many of the same strains or species of microorganisms that live in the microbiome in our brain are the same ones that live in our gut microbiome. So there's a very, very strong connection there. Serotonin, most people think, is made in the brain. It's made in the gut, and it's sent to the brain through the vagus nerve. So
when you think about where you get your gut reactions, your gut instinct, all there, and then
that's right.
There's that connection, and the brain, what's going on.
Absolutely, and that's another thing that's it's so much positive, reinforcement. When your gut's working well, then your mood is good, and when your mood is good, your gut is working well, and it just really becomes this cycle, really. And it's kind of miraculous. It's miraculous also that you can go 20 years really abusing your body, abusing your gut, having a pretty decimated gut microbiome, with very low diversity of different strains. You want to have a lot of different strains of gut microbiota. And yet, even after 20 years of neglect, it's like a switch. Once you start doing things right, somehow they come out of the woodworks. They're hiding in there somewhere in tiny numbers, waiting for the day that you start treating them properly again and feeding them whole food plant fiber, which is what they thrive off of. And they start repopulating the gut and colonizing the gut and rebuilding that mucosal membrane and just having everything work properly. The microbes that live in your gut they're able to do something called crosstalk. You can look this up. It's a real thing. They're able to communicate with the cells in the wall of your gut and tell those cells when something needs to come in because it's nutritious, or when they need to block a pathogen from getting into your bloodstream. So they communicate with your actual cells in your body.
Wow, like you say, it's amazing, isn't it? We're miraculous.
Yeah.
We don't fully understand how amazing each and every one of us are.
Yes, that is the key. That is the key to really understand the miracle of our biology, because it's truly miraculous, and it eclipses, as far as I'm concerned, it eclipses anything they've been able to figure out in medicine and science. With all due respect, I know there've been some tremendous discoveries in the 20th century and now even the 21st, but eclipses, it's so complex that until now nobody really understands how the human gut microbiome works. They still don't. I think they've identified like 5% of the strains and the functions of those strains in your body. So like 95% of them, they don't even know what they do there. They're just there doing something with our immune system, something with our digestion, something with feeding all the trillions of cells in our body the nutrition they need, but they don't really know how it all operates, how the machine works.
And then, that is something that most people don't know. Most people just assume that that doctor is a doctor and they know absolutely everything. There's nothing, we know how the body works, we know how it functions, we know what it does, and that is, and we don't, and we just don't understand that there's more, so much more.
There's so much more. And so it's reassuring that we're on a level playing field in some senses with even the top experts. Because there's in medical school, there's no training for nutrition. I think I read something like they spend about 1 day on nutrition in the 4 years of medical school, and certainly I don't think there's a lot taught about the human microbiome, which is the backbone of our immune system and our well-being. So you'd figure it's something important to understand.
So I was just thinking, one final question, because I know there'll be people that might watch this and think, what Paul's done sounds great, but it seems scary. Like you said, you've reached out to people before. It seems hard. It seems scary. So how do you function now in life, in society? Are you allowed to go out and have a treat if you want to have a treat? Can you, do you work? You might not even work like that anymore, but for most people coming into this, they might think, a life just living on fruit and vegetables sounds terrible, even though what they might be going through is already terrible. But that might seem equally as terrible to them. So how do you function now in the world that we live in?
Sure. There's a lot to unpack in that question, and it's obviously it's a big one, and I'm sure that a lot of people, they're sick and they want a cure, they want an answer, but then if it's too rigorous, I think, it's a turnoff. Or if they go, oh my God, like you said, I need to eat fruits and vegetables the rest of my life. I mean, I don't eat just fruits and vegetables, obviously. I eat a pretty diverse diet. What I can say, for anyone starting out, they really do have to make a religious commitment, because that starting point, if you have to switch off the inflammatory trigger. So if you're like, I'm going to eat 80% healthy, but still 20% junk processed foods and so on, I'm not sure you're going to be able to really achieve, switching off that chronic inflammatory process. So it requires a religious commitment in the beginning. Now, I would imagine, I can only speak on my own experience, I'd imagine the less time you've had the disease for, the quicker it is to heal it, right? So whereas it took me a few years to reach basically a point where I feel I have no symptoms at all, and I totally normal bowel movements and all that kind of stuff. I would imagine somebody who maybe was just diagnosed a year ago, it might only be a matter of weeks or months for them to kind of get back to normal. So it may not require a really, really long, religious commitment, but it's certainly important to go in at 100% and not anything less. And what I can say in my own experience is, yes, because I've repaired my gut, I can every so often have stuff like, I'll have a bit of pizza or something.
Mhm.
I don't eat dairy, so I have it. There's like cashew cheese and all sorts of great, alternatives. So yeah, it's not that I just eat fruits and vegetables. I mean, there's still lots of room for good, tasty stuff. And because I was like 20 years, not eating like raw fruits and vegetables, it was so miraculous to be able to go back to doing that I'm still 4 years later, I get totally giddy and excited about just a big bowl of fruit, like a mango. I'm like Pavlov's dogs. I see a mango and I'm salivating, or pineapple. When you stop eating all the junk food, your palate changes. Like your taste buds don't require that high kick of sugar. So then when you eat a banana or a peach or whatever it is, it tastes like the perfect amount of sweetness. And so I myself, I love eating healthy because I couldn't do it for so long. So now to eat broccoli and all sorts of stuff I could never eat, it's really wonderful. I love it. It tastes so good to me. And I think my body, my biology is playing some kind of a biochemical trick on my brain to force me to keep eating good because it wants those nutrients. So it's managed to, I don't know, tamper with the cells in my taste bud cells or whatever. That stuff still tastes wonderful, and I love it. And that's what I eat most of the time. And occasionally, if I'm somewhere where I might eat something that's like a little less healthy, as long as I don't go berserk, it doesn't have any impact on me whatsoever. If I did a solid week of just eating junk food, I imagine by the end of that week, I'd start to see some of the old symptoms coming back.
Yeah.
So, but I don't want to go back there. There's no incentive to at all. So people, I don't think the starting point should be, okay, how long until I can go back to eating McDonald's?
Yeah.
I think you got to part with McDonald's and Coca-Cola and stuff that has they're zero nutritional value and a lot of negative value.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of damage to your body, to your microbiome, and so on. So that stuff I think you should naturally want to do away with, especially if you have an inflammatory bowel disease.
Yeah. Okay. So for anybody listening today who might be in that position where they've got their back against the wall like you did, something's coming at them and they feel inside them that that's not the right path for them and they want to look at something else, what advice would you give them? Because like you say, what happened to you, that would be overwhelming for some people to delve into this world of internet research and every single person's got a different opinion on what you should do. It's a lot. Right. So do you have any advice for someone in that situation?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the first piece of advice I'd give is nothing radical. I mean, I didn't say one day I'm stopping all my medications. My doctor took me off of all my medications in preparation of the surgery. So I don't advise anybody to do anything super radical, like just stopping all your meds in one day, in one fell swoop. But I think these things really should be done in parallel with whatever treatment you're following. And I believe the results will come, and that's when you should hopefully start to be able to wean off of whatever pharmaceutical therapy you're doing. Maybe some people need the two in tandem, but maybe the overall their overall quality of life will improve anyways. It keeps coming back to the programming of the subconscious mind. I don't know if you've ever checked out Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, Biology of Belief. Do you know anything?
Yeah, it's on my bookshelf.
There you go. Right. So it's such an important message. But if you're programmed to believe you're going to be sick, and that message is reinforced over and over and over again, you're going to be sick, right? And you're going to stay sick. So the starting point is anybody that's watching this, anybody that's listening, I believe with all my heart, you can get better. You absolutely can improve your situation. Maybe you can completely reverse your disease and it can disappear. Maybe. You certainly can definitely improve your situation. So that chance meeting I had with that professor of oncology, that's what he did. He planted that seed in my head, and that was sort of downloaded into my subconscious mind. And I kept kind of replaying that message, and it kept getting reinforced as I was making progress with his advice. So you need to switch the program. And I know people like Bruce Lipton have they recommend NLP, they recommend
Yeah.
many methods. I guess somehow I was able to do it just with my own thoughts or whatever, which is probably a longer and more difficult way to do it. But that hope is really the key to getting better. And you know what, Carrie? I mean, I've looked at all the biological mechanisms of how whole food plant fiber feeds your gut microbiome, and those microbes convert that fiber when they eat it, when they consume it. They convert it into short chain amino acids, the building blocks of proteins and everything in our body, that antioxidants, and go around, gobbling up free radicals and repairing broken DNA and all that. So there's a lot of clear biological connection between what you're eating and how your body functions. But all that said, maybe 80% of my recovery was just the biology of belief that I can get better. And I started to get better, and I started believing that more. There's a very powerful component to the the psychological component of it is extremely powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So people that are chronically ill, that are being told day and day after day, you're sick, you're sick, you're sick. This is your life. This is what it's got to be. No, don't accept that. Do not accept that. That is not what your life has to be. Your life can be much better. Your quality of life can be much better. And truly, you can. I think in most cases of chronic disease, people can make big strides, big improvements. So the first thing to do is accept that message and embrace that message. Don't just accept it, embrace it. And then go on your journey to find out really what needs to be done to help improve your situation. And I know I'm seeing everything through the lens of the gut, but from everything I've read, the human microbiome is the key component to so many chronic diseases, not just inflammatory bowel disease. It's connected with obesity. It's connected with diabetes. It's connected with cancer. That's why that professor of oncology was so much about the microbiome. And then he started to understand how it's helping other stuff like Crohn's and colitis as well. But really, eating healthy, I think, is the key component. There's a lot of stuff. Breathing properly, breathing through your nose and not through your mouth. You've got cilia, kind of like those little fingers in your gut, but little tiny hairs in your nasal cavity that they basically greatly they improve the uptake of nitric oxide when you're breathing oxygen through breathing air through your nose. And nitric oxide is one of the most important molecules for healthy human biology. So nitric oxide, it's free and it's in the air. If you breathe through your nose, your nasal cavities will improve the uptake into your body. If you breathe through your mouth, that process is mostly avoided. There's other stuff like fight or flight versus rest and digest, if you're familiar with those terms.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me, zooming out, most of society is in a state of constant sort of pressure and anxiety, whether it's from work, whether it's just this daily cycle, and then the free floating anxiety of things like the current pandemic and even before the pandemic. So there's this chronic state of fight or flight, and that puts a tremendous amount of stress on your body and usually expresses itself as inflammation of one sort or another. Diabetes is chronic inflammation in your cells. Heart disease is also connected to inflammation. Most of the chronic diseases are rooted in inflammation in your body. So you need to figure out how to reverse that inflammation.
Yeah, exactly. And it's such a powerful message that you've got there, particularly to do with just looking at your beliefs and changing your beliefs and writing
that's it.
programs that you run.
And it comes, you mentioned, we were talking like about herbal doctors versus traditional doctors, and so all the herbal stuff and homeopathy and all that's called alternative medicine, right? But it's weird. I was thinking about it. It's such a misnomer, because what is it the alternative to? Like, that's the way humans were doing medicine for a very long stretch of time. It would seem to me the chemistry, the pharmaceutical approach, which has been around for 80 years or something, I don't know, 100 years, that's the alternative, right? That's the very new and mostly ineffective way of treating chronic disease. We've been using all these wonderful things at our disposal in nature for eons.
Yeah.
And so understand that and embrace that. And people will be surprised. I cured a terrible case of strep throat in 2 days with oregano oil. I mean, it's just super powerful stuff. It's more powerful than antibiotics without the downside. So people should embrace what nature has provided us with, because it's powerful stuff. It's what we've evolved with for a long stretch of time.
Yeah. And so if people want to find out more about you then, Paul, I know you put together a blog. Do you have the address for that in case people want to look into more about you, what you've done?
Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's really a blog kind of outlining my healing journey. And I'm trying to add interesting content that's engaging, a lot of stuff we've spoken about today. Also going to be adding some very specific stuff and tips for people with Crohn's and colitis and inflammatory bowel disease. So the blog is called 1% Human. If you're kind enough maybe to put it in the description after.
Yeah.
Super. So it's just spelled out, 1% human, one word, .com.
Okay.
And the reason it's called 1% Human is, again, once I started to really embrace this, the whole, the human microbiome as the kind of the key to health and healing. So we're, our bodies are made up, depending on your size, you may have like 20, trillion cells that are part of your biology. But it turns out, we have probably like 50, 60 trillion microorganisms living within us. They're not part of our own cells, but they're within us. What we are really. And so we're kind of outnumbered, maybe like 10 to 1, depending again on several factors. But then if you factor in their genome, because every living thing has a genome of their own. So each of these microorganisms have their own genome. And I don't know if you've looked into much about epigenetics. I'm including a lot of stuff about, Bruce Lipton, so about epigenetics. So epigenetic factors that may be influencing the genome of all those microorganisms in our body and in our gut microbiome, we're outnumbered like 100 to 1. We're, this whole thing, you're about 1% human and 99% other. And there's stuff with junk genes, what used to be called junk genes. They thought like 95%, 97% of the human genome is just all this like leftover garbage from evolution. No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of stuff in there. They just don't understand, how it works and what's going on. But not only can you affect your own genome, you can certainly affect the genome of that, that massive body of microorganisms living inside you, and manipulate that. Essentially biohacking. I kind of, I started to call myself a biohacktivist. So, that's ultimately, it's a very powerful tool. Once you learn how to use it, you can affect great change on your biology and your existence, I guess. It's almost, it's metaphysical in some ways, and it's really tremendous power there. So the idea of the blog is to really understand, to start to scratch away at understanding, because nobody understands. It's like saying, oh, I know the size of the universe. You don't. Nobody does. So it's really about trying to understand how to optimize your microbiome and your whole being, your whole self, your biology.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. Well, what I'll do is I'll pop that in there because, like you say, it's really interesting that, and people don't know about that sort of thing. We don't know. We're made up of things like that.
Yeah. It's starting, there's like, luckily, I think with all the free flow of information, I'm not the only guy speaking about this, and there's stuff coming out. So with a bit of research and patience, I think people will eventually land on it, and it spreads, right? It's like a virus. It kind of the information gets out and it spreads, and I think people can empower themselves with this information.
Exactly, and that's what's most important.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say, if we are just about to wrap up, is I started to think about our global predicament at the moment, pivoting a little bit now in terms of this interview, and going external from just dealing internally. And I think our global predicament is not unlike our own biology. We're made up of trillions of cells, and we've got cells that are not part of our biology in there as well. And it's just a whole big conglomerate of stuff that need to work together. Our cells need to work together. You've probably heard Bruce Lipton talking about this. I think I'm just kind of regurgitating some of his thoughts here. And for our body to work as a whole, all those trillions of little tiny components have to all come together and work together. And that's how this thing called me, functions and navigates in the three-dimensional world we live in. I think the same can be said for humanity. I think we have to look at ourselves almost like cells, and we need to cooperate. We need to come together to really further humanity, to take humanity into a much better place. And I think we can create that better place. Some are calling it the Great Awakening, right, as a kind of response to the Great Reset. So that Great Awakening, I think it requires us to almost to look at ourselves like all of humanity is one massive organism, and we are each of us a tiny cell, a tiny cog in that kind of massive biological thing, whatever it is, very much also connected with our planet. And I think this understanding can help us get there.
Yeah, I love that way of thinking about it. Yeah, that we're just a small part of a whole, and we can all join together, and then we can be as awesome as we can make our individual bodies. We can be this positive mass of kindness and compassion and love and all of that stuff. Instead of
raising the vibration, right? Raising the vibration and that's it. So that's I think that's really where we need to go. So hopefully this kind of knowledge can help us get there.
Yeah, that's a great message to end on as well. And it gives people definitely food for thought to start thinking of yourself as part of something bigger, than just little me who knows nothing, who can't do anything, stuck with life the way it is, so much more.
This daily grind of like, get up, get ready, go rush off to work somewhere, run around, get hammered on the head by all different segments of society, deal with your banking issues and whatever, and then come home and go to sleep and start all over again the next day. Yeah, that's it doesn't have to be just about that. So
we can have so much more. So what an amazing I think that's a brilliant way to end there on that message. So thank you so much for spending the time today. There'll be somebody somewhere who really needs to hear this message today, and I know like that professor found you, somebody will find this video. So thank you.
Thanks for giving me the platform.
All right, and thank you everybody for watching today, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.